When we think about the word no, most people immediately attach fear to it. We've been conditioned, almost hypnotized, to believe that saying yes is the polite, smart, socially acceptable response. Yes keeps you safe. Yes helps you avoid conflict. Yes ensures people like you. But there's a deeper truth that most never discover. Saying no, when it's rooted in understanding and purpose, is one of the highest expressions of personal power. When India stood up and said no to a deal that every other nation had readily accepted, it wasn't being rebellious, arrogant, or disobedient. It was being aware of its unique position, its future vision, and most importantly, aware of the consequences of blind agreement. Think of this as a universal metaphor. Life presents all of us with decisions every day. The world, your environment, your circle people will urge you to agree, to comply, to follow the path of least resistance. They'll say, everyone else is doing it, why not you? But if you don't stop and ask, is this aligned with my values? Is this true to my vision? You risk surrendering not just your direction, but your identity. India, in that moment of refusal, didn't just make a policy decision. It made a declaration of self-authority. That is a rare thing in both geopolitics and in our personal lives. That same kind of internal power, that ability to discern and decline, is something we all must learn if we are to build meaningful lives. See, saying no requires something far greater than intelligence. It requires consciousness. It demands that you step out of the reactive state and step into reflection. A reactive person hears an offer and instinctively agrees out of fear. Fear of missing out, fear of confrontation, fear of rejection. But a conscious person pauses. A conscious person assesses. A conscious person doesn't chase safety in the crowd. They find security in clarity, clarity of vision, clarity of values, and when that clarity is strong enough, the courage to say no follows naturally. Why do most people say yes even when they want to say no? Because they're ruled by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty, fear of standing alone. But all progress, all transformation starts with the individual who is willing to stand alone, just like India did. It's not easy to go against the flow. It's not easy to reject the comfortable path. But history remembers those who do, not the ones who followed the trend, but the ones who set a new standard. That's the power of no. It separates you from the noise and reconnects you to your truth. Now, take this beyond politics and into your life. How many times have you said yes to something that didn't serve you? A job that drained your energy, a relationship that dulled your spirit, a habit that sabotaged your growth. Every time you said yes when your inner knowing whispered no, you dimmed your own light. That isn't just a small mistake. That's a pattern of self-betrayal. And self-betrayal is the fastest path to anxiety, frustration, and emotional fatigue. You think you're being agreeable, but in truth, you're slowly giving away your power. The moment you begin to honor your inner knowing, your intuition, you start to see that no isn't rejection, no isn't negativity, no is redirection, no is saying, I am the authority of my life. I am not here to blend in, I'm here to align. India's refusal was a national assertion of sovereignty. Your refusal, when done consciously, is a personal assertion of sovereignty. It means you trust yourself enough to go against the grain. It means you believe in your own path enough to walk it alone, if necessary. There's a great lie society teaches, that agreement equals harmony. But sometimes agreement is the very thing that creates internal chaos. You can't agree with something externally and be at peace internally if your spirit knows it's wrong. That's a war. That's a war between your truth and your compliance. And the longer you live like that, the more disconnected you become from who you really are. That's why saying no is not just powerful, it's essential. It's how you protect your energy, preserve your integrity, and build a destiny that's truly your own. Saying no doesn't require aggression. It requires awareness. It's not about being difficult, it's about being deliberate. When you say no to what doesn't serve you, you simultaneously say yes to what will. You free up time, focus, and emotional bandwidth. You realign with your purpose. You get back in control. That's what India did on the global stage, and that's what you must learn to do in your inner world. There's something magnetic about a person who knows what they stand for. They don't need to explain. They don't need approval. They radiate certainty, and certainty is what attracts opportunity, not desperate agreement. Destiny is often seen as something that happens to us, as though it's written in the stars or decided by some invisible force beyond our control. But the truth is far more empowering. Destiny is not designed by circumstance. It is constructed by the choices we make, especially the ones we take ownership of. When India refused to sign a deal that every other nation agreed to, it was not merely avoiding a trap, it was consciously shaping its own future. The act of refusal wasn't just about the present moment. It was about securing sovereignty over the path ahead. In the same way, your personal destiny is not a product of what life hands you. It's forged from the decisions you commit to, the ones you take full responsibility for, even when they seem difficult, unpopular, or isolating. There's a fundamental shift that occurs when you realize you are not a victim of circumstances, but the architect of your future. Most people drift through life reacting to whatever comes their way. They say yes to whatever's offered. They agree to things they don't believe in. And they align with paths simply because they appear convenient or familiar. But convenience and alignment are not the same. You don't build destiny through comfort. You build destiny through conscious choice by knowing who you are, what you stand for, and what you refuse to compromise on. That's what India demonstrated on the world stage, and that's what you must embody in your personal evolution. The world often mistakes agreement for wisdom. It says, everyone else is doing it, so it must be right. But that's not how greatness works. Greatness is born in the moments when someone sees the herd moving in one direction and has the insight and courage to walk another way. That decision to deviate is not rebellion for its own sake. It's responsibility. It's taking ownership of one's direction. And that is the essence of self-leadership. You can't lead a life of purpose and freedom if you're afraid to make decisions that others don't understand. When you say no to something that everyone else has accepted, you're not rejecting opportunity, you're refining it. You're aligning with something deeper than public opinion, your inner compass, and that compass, when followed consistently, doesn't lead you to a destination that's been mapped by others. It leads you to your own summit, your own mission, your own version of success. But most people never get there, not because they aren't capable, but because they never learn to trust themselves enough to walk away from what doesn't fit. Choice is a sacred power. It's what separates a life of reaction from a life of creation. Every time you choose with intention, you signal to life that you are not here to drift. You are here to drive. You are not here to be molded, you are here to shape reality. That one decision to step back, to say no, to decline the offer that everyone else accepts, it's more than a decision. It's a declaration that you're not operating from fear or pressure, but from a deep awareness of what's right for you. India saw what others didn't. It recognized that the short-term gain of signing a deal would cost long-term autonomy. That awareness turned a simple no into a move of generational consequence. In the same way, when you say no to what's easy, what's popular, or what feels safe but shallow, you're not losing. You're investing. You're investing in the long arc of your potential. You're telling the universe, I trust what I'm building more than what I'm being offered. And here's the paradox. The stronger your refusal, the more powerful your magnetism becomes. People are drawn to those who have clarity. Clarity isn't stubbornness, it's certainty, and certainty doesn't come from avoiding decisions. It comes from making them with full awareness. That's why ownership of choice is so transformative. You stop waiting for signs. You stop asking for approval. You stop looking over your shoulder to see who agrees. You begin to walk with focus, and focus gives rise to fulfillment. There's a heavy price to pay when you live a life of unconscious yeses. You build a reality that doesn't reflect who you are. You get trapped in environments, jobs, or roles that feel misaligned. You wake up one day wondering how you got so far from what you wanted. And it all started with one small compromise, but the opposite is also true. One intentional no, just one, can redirect your path and plant the seed for a future that reflects your values, your standards, your calling. True power is not found in options, it's found in commitment. The more deliberate your choices, the fewer options you need. When you stop chasing everything, you start attracting what's meant for you. That is the essence of a destiny you create, not a fate you accept. And that's the example India gave. It saw the offer, measured it against its own long-term blueprint, and declined not out of fear, but from the fullness of vision. The same applies to you. Your circumstances may present 100 offers, but if you have not built the inner foundation to know what aligns and what does not, you'll be pulled in directions that slowly weaken your spirit. There is something deeply powerful about standing alone. In a world where most people are conditioned to seek safety in numbers, to find comfort in agreement, and to avoid the discomfort of isolation, the act of standing alone becomes an act of courage. When India refused to sign a deal that every other nation accepted, it wasn't just breaking away, it was rising above. Because real leadership, real transformation, is never about doing what the crowd does. It's about doing what's right, even when no one else sees it yet. This is a principle that applies not just to nations, but to individuals. When you decide to reject the path everyone else is walking, when you choose to listen to your internal voice rather than external noise, you tap into a level of strength that very few people ever experience. Most people are terrified of standing alone because they confuse loneliness with isolation. But they are not the same. Isolation is when you are cut off without connection, but standing alone is something entirely different. It's a conscious decision to walk your truth. It's not loneliness, it's sovereignty, it's alignment. It's stepping into a place where you no longer need the approval, validation, or permission of others to live your truth. India didn't ask for applause when it refused the deal. It wasn't looking for praise. It was simply aligned with its own understanding of what mattered. That's what made its choice so significant. It was standing in its power, even as the world watched with skepticism. In your own life, you will face moments where the easy thing to do is to agree, to go along, to avoid friction. The harder path, the one with the real reward, is the one where you stand up and say, "This isn't right for me." That may cost you popularity. It may confuse the people around you. It may make you question yourself in the short term. But in the long term, it builds a kind of unshakable confidence that can't be faked or forced. Every time you make a decision that reflects your truth rather than society's expectations, you build inner muscle. You become resilient, you become grounded, you become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you are operating from an energy that's rare, conviction. The majority is not always wise. In fact, the majority is often afraid. It clings to safety, seeks predictability, and avoids responsibility. But when you rise above the need to belong, you begin to live from a place of deeper meaning. You don't follow trends, you follow principles. You don't need direction from others, you operate from your own compass. This is the difference between existing and evolving. India evolved in that moment. It made a conscious move not based on fear, but on foresight. And you must learn to do the same. Not every deal is meant to be taken. Not every offer is a blessing. Not every agreement is an opportunity. Some are distractions. Some are traps in disguise. Some are just shiny packages covering long-term loss. And the ability to see that clearly when no one else does is what separates the aligned from the average. When you stand alone, something else happens. You begin to silence the noise of the world and tune into the frequency of your own intuition. That voice inside you that most people ignore, it gets louder, it gets clearer, it becomes a trusted guide. You begin to feel more, not more emotion, but more clarity. You notice the subtle signals, what energizes you and what drains you, what feels expansive and what feels restrictive, what feels true and what feels like a compromise. This sensitivity becomes your superpower, because while others are still checking the opinions of those around them, you are operating from inner certainty. Standing alone also teaches you something essential about emotions. When you're no longer seeking comfort in conformity, you're forced to confront your inner world. You become more aware of the feelings you've buried, the fears you've ignored, the doubts you've tried to silence with busyness and noise. But that's not a weakness, it's an awakening. You begin to master your emotions rather than being ruled by them. You start learning how to process, how to release, how to choose your emotional state rather than being at the mercy of it. And that is when the real change begins, not just on the surface, but in the deep core of your identity. There is a moment in everyone's life when they must decide, do I want to fit in, or do I want to rise up? Because you can't do both. Fitting in requires sacrifice, usually of your values, your dreams, and your authenticity. Rising up requires sacrifice to comfort, convenience, and the illusion of safety, but one leads to regret and the other leads to growth. India chose growth, not comfort, not applause, not the illusion of unity. It chose sovereignty, and that choice, although it looked like standing alone, was actually the beginning of rising above. You are faced with the same opportunity every day. You may not be negotiating global policies, but you are making choices that shape your future, moment by moment. And every time you follow the crowd when you know you shouldn't, a piece of your power gets buried. But every time you listen to your intuition and act on it, even if no one claps for you, you reclaim that power. You rise, not through force but through alignment. You rise, not by doing more but by doing what's right for you. And when you rise like that, you begin to live at a level that most only dream of. Emotional mastery is not about suppression or denial. It's not about pretending everything is fine when it's not. And it certainly isn't about ignoring the pain, frustration, or anxiety that shows up in daily life. Emotional mastery begins at the moment you decide that your inner world matters more than external validation. Just like India refused to sign a deal to preserve its control over national interest, you must learn to say no to energies, emotions, and thought patterns that threaten your internal stability. That refusal isn't weakness, it's strength, and the boundary it creates is not a wall to keep people out, but a filter to protect your peace. So many people are overwhelmed today, not because life is objectively harder, but because their emotional boundaries are almost non-existent. They allow negativity to walk in unchecked. They absorb stress, opinions, drama, comparison, guilt, all because they've never been taught the discipline of choosing what they feel and why. They think emotions are random and uncontrollable, but that belief is the first illusion you must break. Just as India exercised sovereign control by setting its boundary against external pressure, you too must become sovereign over your emotional state. When you begin to understand the power of setting emotional boundaries, something shifts. You stop being a sponge and start becoming a mirror. You stop absorbing and start reflecting. You no longer allow the low frequency of others to become your state of being. You start asking different questions. Does this thought empower me or drain me? Does this feeling move me forward or pull me backward? You begin choosing your responses with awareness. That's the first layer of emotional mastery, not being ruled by what you feel, but observing it, questioning it, and then consciously deciding how to act. This doesn't mean you avoid pain or discomfort. On the contrary, it means you meet it with presence instead of panic. It means you stop running from discomfort and start learning from it. Just like India's refusal may have brought criticism or isolation in the short term, your emotional boundaries may trigger misunderstanding at first. But the long-term payoff is undeniable. You'll gain clarity, peace, and energy that used to be lost in unnecessary conflict and emotional noise. Think about how much time people lose each day to emotions they didn't choose. Someone cuts them off in traffic, and they carry that anger all day. Someone says a careless word, and they dwell on it for hours. They see something on social media that triggers envy, and it ruins their entire mood. These are all signs of emotional vulnerability, not in the sense of openness, but in the sense of being emotionally unprotected. And emotional protection doesn't mean becoming numb or detached. It means becoming selective. It means you learn how to say, "This does not belong in my space," and mean it. You must begin treating your emotional energy like your most precious resource, because it is. Just like India recognized that agreeing to an external policy could compromise its internal strength, you too must see that saying yes to every emotional impulse, every request for your attention, every guilt-based demand for your empathy will leave you depleted and directionless. Emotional mastery is about conservation, protecting your inner state, so you can channel your energy where it truly matters. But boundaries are not just about what you say no to, they're also about what you say yes to. They are about making room for better emotions, higher thoughts, and stronger habits. You start cultivating joy, gratitude, and peace not by forcing yourself to be positive, but by clearing the space where those emotions can live. You can't feel peace if you're constantly allowing chaos in. You can't experience clarity if your mind is constantly filled with noise. You can't create purpose if you're always reacting to pressure. Setting emotional boundaries is a daily practice. It shows up in small, powerful moments. Choosing not to argue when your peace is more important. Turning off the news when you feel your energy sinking. Saying no to a conversation that's only going to trigger old wounds. These acts may seem small, but they are evidence of mastery, because emotional strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like stillness. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like walking away from something you've outgrown without needing to explain yourself to anyone. What most people don't realize is that emotional mastery is not just a skill, it's a leadership trait. You can't lead yourself, much less anyone else, if you're constantly at the mercy of your emotional states. Leadership requires presence, clarity, and the ability to choose responses rather than fall into reactions. That's what setting boundaries allows. It gives you the space to breathe before you respond, the power to think before you act, and the freedom to align before you engage. Just like India demonstrated strategic patience and long-term thinking, emotional mastery requires you to delay your reaction long enough to find your center again. This is not about becoming cold or detached. It's about becoming deeply connected to yourself. You don't shut people out. You shut noise out. You don't avoid feelings, you examine them. And through that examination, you grow, you evolve, you get stronger, not just in will, but in wisdom. Your energy becomes more focused. Your presence becomes more grounded. And in a world that constantly pushes emotional urgency, you become a rare force, calm, clear, and unshakably centered. Transformation is often mistaken for a slow, linear process, something that takes years of effort and countless steps to initiate. But the truth is, real transformation, lasting, soul, deep change, doesn't begin with 1,000 steps. It begins with one brave decision, one moment where you draw a line in the sand and say, no more. One instance of powerful clarity where you choose to act differently, think differently, and align differently than you ever have before. India's refusal to sign a deal that the rest of the world was quick to accept wasn't a political maneuver. It was a defining decision. It was a declaration that marked the beginning of a new trajectory. And that's exactly how change begins in your own life, not through massive overhauls, but through small, intentional moments of defiance against the old self. In that moment of refusal, something invisible but incredibly powerful begins to shift. You begin to detach from past patterns that kept you limited. You stop identifying with the version of yourself that says yes out of fear, doubt, or habit. You stop accepting what's handed to you and start demanding what aligns with who you truly are. That moment, though it may look small from the outside, is the ignition point of transformation. It's when the internal compass resets. It's when you stop reacting and start creating. That is the birth of destiny. Not the kind of destiny that happens to you, but the kind you shape with your own hands. The power of one decision is vastly underestimated. We think we need to wait for the right conditions, the perfect timing, the full plan. But life rarely delivers perfection, it rewards readiness. When you are ready to change and you back that readiness with action, the ripple effects are profound. You stop being a passive observer in your own life and become the author. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need everyone's support. You only need alignment. That moment of alignment may come quietly, or it may arrive in the middle of chaos. But when it comes, you will feel it like a click inside your spirit. Something just locks in place. You know this is it. This is the moment that changes everything. There are people who spend years reading, preparing, thinking, and planning, yet nothing changes. Why? Because they never make that one decisive move. They stay in analysis, in fear, in perfectionism. They delay. They say, I'm not ready, or maybe tomorrow. But life is not moved by what you think. It responds to what you do. One bold decision cuts through years of hesitation. One no to a toxic relationship, one yes. To a dream you've buried, one refusal to compromise on your values. These are not just moments, they are doorways. They lead to entirely new chapters of your life that were waiting for you to show up with courage, and courage isn't loud. It doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes courage is quiet. It's the choice to walk away when you're scared. The choice to begin again even after you've failed. The choice to risk being misunderstood in order to stay authentic. That's what transformation demands. Not that you change everything overnight, but that you begin with truth. That you act from alignment. That you trust the part of you that knows what needs to shift, even when the world doesn't see it yet. Look at any powerful person, any moment of historic change, any great invention, movement, or breakthrough. It all started with one decision. One individual choosing not to continue on the path they were handed, choosing to disrupt the pattern, choosing to create something better, something truer. That choice might seem minor in the moment, but the energy behind it, when it comes from clarity and conviction, carries extraordinary momentum. You may not see the results right away, but that decision starts a process you can't stop. It alters your identity. It changes how you see yourself, what you accept, and what you demand from life. Transformation doesn't begin with the world around you changing. It begins with you changing your response to the world, saying, I will no longer settle, saying, I refuse to follow a path that doesn't honor who I am, saying, I may not know every step ahead, but I trust myself to take the first one. And that first one, however small it may appear, is more powerful than 1,000 intentions never acted on. One decision with deep conviction behind it can erase years of stagnation. It can lift you out of doubt, break your attachment to fear, and create space for the new life that's been calling you. The challenge is that these decisions rarely feel easy. They often come with resistance. The mind will flood you with reasons to wait, to compromise, to stick with what's familiar. But you have to recognize that fear is not a sign to stop. It's a sign you're about to enter new territory. And transformation only lives in new territory. It doesn't exist in comfort zones or echo chambers. It's born in the wild places, the uncertain spaces where you must trust your own voice above the noise. That's why one brave decision carries so much weight. It's not just about the action, it's about the energy behind it. It tells the world, I am no longer who I was. It tells your subconscious, we're not playing small anymore. And even if no one notices right away, something in you has changed. You've activated a different timeline. You've rewritten the script. And with every decision that follows, that change becomes more real, more embodied, more undeniable. You are not waiting to become, you are becoming through choice, through action, through one decision at a time.